My guest today is award-winning film director Brit Hensel, whose work has been featured at Sundance, Imaginative, Hot Docs, and Full Frame. She is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and she is the first female enrolled member of the tribe to direct a film selected by the Sundance Film Festival. Now, in 2021, Brit received 4 regional Emmy Awards for her work as a producer and a director on the documentary series OCO, Voices of the Cherokee People. She also served as a second AC on the Emmy-nominated FX series Reservation Dogs. Now, in 2022, her short film What They've Been Taught premiered at Sundance and was also nominated for Best Short Documentary at the 38th IDA Documentary Awards. Now, Brit has premiered her latest film, Thin Places, co-starring Shelby and Quannah Chasinghorse at Imaginative Film Festival this June. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome award-winning filmmaker Brit Hensel and her newest short film, Thin Places, to the show. Welcome, Brit.
Thank you for having me.
Well, where did the idea of Thin Places come from, and did it come from a personal experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, it definitely, this film, Thin Places, came really from my work, like my first real bout with grief. Um, and sort of, I don't know, I think a lot of with my filmmaking, it's something that I do because I love it and I'm excited and it's a story I want to tell. And the creation of this film really felt a lot different. It was something that I did sort of out of necessity, to sort of really process how I was feeling and what my experience had been. And without being too on the nose with, specifically what I was going through, I decided to sort of bury the story between the love of two sisters, and sort of use their connection and their love for one another to really dive into the idea of, we're still connected to those who have passed on, and our loved ones who are not, maybe their physical presence is not here anymore, they're still with us, and there are ways we can still connect as people. So that was sort of the impetus behind the project.
So, how much did your Cherokee heritage play into the storyline? Because one of my favorite things about Indian heritage and traditions is the strong connection to the spirit world, and I felt that in this film.
Yeah. I think there's kind of two parts to that question. I think as Native people, in cinema, oftentimes we're very boxed in about what is Indigenous cinema or how we are represented or what is considered Native. And my culture, my connection to my culture and my language, and my community are very, very close to me. I'm very active in my identity as a person. But when I wrote this film, I decided that I wanted the film to sort of just be about two sisters who happened to be Native. We weren't very on the nose with it, but sort of the way of thought and how we connect to one another is definitely based on, aspects of my culture, the use of the tobacco and thin places. And traditionally speaking, tobacco is a medicine that we use to pray. We either can gift it or smoke it or do things along those lines. But the thought is that it's a vehicle for our prayers to the above world, and to those who are maybe not here. But usually, even when we just pray for people who we want to feel better, we will smoke that tobacco and send our intentions and our thoughts into that. But for me, in Thin Places, I thought it would be a really lovely connection to when she does smoke that cigarette or she does put that tobacco down, that it's the thing that brings her closer to her sister. So,
Yeah, now, we have all heard that grief is just love looking for a place to go.
mm-hmm.
In your film, Birdie, played by Shelby displayed grief and love with such deep realism. So,
Mm-hmm.
as a director, how did you help Shelby bring those emotions, especially in the absence of Tama?
Yeah, I think, when I started casting, the casting process for this film, yes, it was important to me to have Native women. I'm Native. Much of our crew is Native. This film was created by Native women producers. So I was very excited about that, of course. But I really wanted to find actresses who were not going to be afraid of this space I was going to give them to really take a hold of their character. Um, I think something that we experience at higher levels in Native communities is grief. And it's sort of been an experience we've had to walk alongside as communities for quite some time. So we're not really far from that feeling or that realization in our lives. But Shelby, through this process, like I knew she had the chops for it, and I knew she had the dedication. But she had recently experienced her grandmother passing, and so in the process of prepping for this film, we kind of all talked about like, who is our Tama? We all have one. And she started sharing about her grandmother. And you'll hear it throughout the film. There's a humming sound, or Shelby is humming on camera. Um, and I found out later on, almost after we wrapped, that that was a song that her grandmother loved. And it was a song that she sang quite a bit. So it's like elements like that of infusing real authenticity and real lived experience into the story, and their characters. And so, yeah, that was something that I hoped for them. And knowing both of their backgrounds, both Shelby and Quannah, really wanted to give them the opportunity to step forward and take a hold of their characters and make them very personal. And it's something John Cassavetes is great for having done with his actors, and really wanting them to have personal buy-in in the shape and the creation of their character. And it brings this level of authenticity that I think is very palpable. And so I was very happy that they had the courage, and also the excitement around really wanting to buy into the character and using their real lived experience in that process.
It comes across on camera so natural, so real. The audience feels the deep hidden emotions that are going on, especially in Birdie.
Yeah.
And you feel that in every scene. And one of the most powerful lines in the film comes from, is it pronounced Tama? Is that how you
Mm-hmm.
pronounce her name? Okay, Tama.
Yeah.
So she says, "Don't hold that. Don't carry that. I'm everywhere you are, and
Mm-hmm.
he's everywhere you are." She's exposing the thin places, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's another thing in our culture. And I can speak about Cherokee specific things. While there are many similarities between Native communities, there's 39 tribes in the state of Oklahoma. We're all different. We have different, languages and cultures and things, but there are a ton of similarities. But for my community specifically, animals are messengers. Birds specifically are messengers. And so we had her talking in that scene, like, I come to you in the animals and those types of things. And I think those are little reminders of our connection, and that we're never alone. And it was sort of, for me, in my process of writing this film, knowing that with the sort of cultural understanding and traditional understanding of these teachings, it made me feel less alone while I was experiencing grief. And it was sort of like a sign to keep going, and just the reminder that we're never really by ourselves. And so, having her speak to that, of, sort of being a witness to her sister's life since she's passed, and coming back with wisdom of, you don't have to hang on to this anymore. Like, everything's okay, and you have to keep going. So yeah, I think it was something that was very real for me in my lived experience. And then I was so happy that it translated well to camera.
Yeah, I mean, and I think when people are experiencing grief, there's those little signs. And let's
Mm-hmm.
use what you just said. Let's use nature
Yeah.
as the example of the signs. I've even come into my office early in the morning, just to be quiet and still, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'll have like a cardinal or a little
Mm-hmm.
wren show up on the windowsill. And I
Mm-hmm.
had this little wren. He's so cute because he shows up and he taps on the glass.
Oh,
And I'm like, okay, what's the
what are you trying to
message in this?
say?
Yeah, what are you
Yeah.
trying to say? So I think that when people are experiencing grief, it's those little things
Yeah.
that can bring peace. And for
Mm-hmm.
some, maybe bring a little bit of an answer
Yeah.
to help them, not only for the day, but for the days to come. Now, when both Birdie and Tama are in the meadow on the blanket, and when Birdie moves to light her cigarette, she moves back. I replayed that scene because at first I'm like, I just watched it for what it was. I replayed it, watched it again, and I went, huh.
Mm-hmm.
That scene, and this is me talking, that scene showed that the instant empty feeling people get when they are having this wonderful memory of someone they lost.
Mm-hmm.
Then that feeling moves in too quickly where that feeling leaves and all of a sudden their heart sinks.
Yeah.
And I felt that moment in that scene. What did you feel as you were directing it?
Oh man, I was crying. Actually, a funny story. Um, when that happened, the cinematographer's nose started to bleed, and I took the camera. So I finished shooting that whole scene, and it was really quite um, a very emotionally heightened moment that worked out so wonderfully. But yeah, I mean, I think it was just the sort of realization of yes, like it still remains on you to carry on, and that is the reality of it. Um, and I think just as these things are accessible and our loved ones are accessible and their spirit is still here, those are all wonderful and beautiful. It's like in the real purview of life in this side of the world, it's like, well, I still have to put one foot in front of the other, and how am I going to do that? And again, it was that sort of that tobacco smoke coming from that cigarette that kind of brought her here and took her out.
Yeah,
That
and
was
then
sort of
when you get
kind of what
that
I was thinking.
feeling that where your heart just sinks, like you had
Yeah.
this wonderful moment
Hmm.
of remembering, and then it just leaves you so fleetingly.
Hmm.
You grasp to go back
Hmm.
to that nice feeling. But I also watched something else in that scene, and the fact that you filmed at sunset
Hmm.
added an extra element. It's like as another day fades, the memory will come in the days to come, hoping that hurt won't hurt so much. But
Hmm.
were you also chasing daylight filming that scene?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's so funny because you don't think about these things when you're in the writing process. As everything was set at golden hour, and thinking, oh yeah, no problem. We'll be able to get the coverage and it'll be great. Um, but yeah, no, it was quite a race against time for that sun. So we had two separate days where we did passes again of those sequences, and so we had um, a couple great shots at it. But honestly, the first night that we did it, we got it. The girls just, I had them improvise. I had them run the scene scripted, and then I started throwing scenarios out at them, and I wanted to see how they were going to change. And actually, the improvised moments are what made it. But yeah, the lighting was beautiful. And I don't know, I think there's something like anyone who's seen Days of Heaven knows the impact that golden hour can bring to like really elevating a story. And I think for me personally, it's like, without sounding cheesy, that when it's golden hour, I feel like magic can happen during that time. And so that was sort of my connection to that, and um, really having it be just this serene, beautiful moment where they just pick back up right where they've left. And then we got lucky with that crazy thunderstorm that quickly followed.
I was going to ask because I saw the thunderstorm and I went, that's real.
Yeah.
And so it just was one of those magical moments.
It was, yeah. When the light finally dropped in that last bit where Birdie lights her cigarette and then she gets up and walks out. I mean, that was happening in real time. So we threw all the gear and the gaiters that we had and hauled back up to the top of the hill, and we caught her with that heat lining behind her. It was just perfect timing. And I spoke to an elder about it and shared with him just kind of about the project. And I said, "Man, we got so lucky." And he said, "No." He said, "Y'all got blessed. Like that's what that was for." And when you're doing things in the right way, the right things will come. And yeah, it just that was real. So.
Yeah, I always tell filmmakers, I said, there's two ways. There's always the magical moments, but then there's the
Hmm.
miracle moments.
Yep.
And I have seen so many films in the last year in which the filmmakers or the directors and the cinematographers, they're chasing daylight.
Hmm.
Then in your case, I was like, oh my gosh, I would have hated to be the cinematographer because, like you said, the golden hour, it's from daylight to nighttime. There's that dusk. And to
Mm-hmm.
me, that is the most difficult
Mm-hmm.
for camera setup.
Yep.
Because I'm like, because you're caught between light
Yep.
and dark, and you've got to make sure you can see the actors,
Yeah.
And so when I saw this, I went, it just came out so beautiful. And
Thank you.
and I noticed there's this very particular tone of your film, and you kept it consistent throughout. When I went back to the begin after I watched it, I went back to the beginning to watch some particular scenes, and then I went back again and I noticed this tone. So I guess the only way for me to actually describe it would be it was surreal,
Mm,
lost in the memory of a lost loved one. There was sadness, but
yeah.
there were moments of joy, but then they were pushed away by the loss.
Yeah.
How would you describe the tone?
I think I I wanted the film to feel sort of like the stages of grief, not literally, but sort of physically, which to me, in my experience, felt a lot like waiting. And I don't know. I was very inspired by the tone of Abbas Kiarostami's film, The Taste of Cherry, which also does deal with death. Um, and there was something so meditative about that film. And I think as an audience member in watching that film, was very, very moved by just this such simplicity, but it made me kind of have to keep staying at it. Like, what's going to happen here? Like, I'm placing these pieces together, but I'm not being told directly, and I'm feeling very deeply. And it's sort of the composition of the frames and how we were building the frames was very, very inspired by Kiarostami's approach to Taste of Cherry. And I think we did a great job, but I think, I don't know, like there's this, the film just kind of runs when I watch it, and that was super, super intentional. I wanted people to not necessarily have to be uncomfortable, but I wanted them to have to kind of chase what was going on and to really have to kind of be arrested in not knowing and being quiet and observing. And I think cinema like that type of cinema isn't happening at a rapid rate at this day and age, and I think it's really valuable. And those are the films that I love to watch. And yeah, I feel incredibly proud about the tone that we achieved, because that was exactly what I was hoping for, and it is sort of a mirror to that season of my life, how I felt my days were going. And so I'm happy that comes through.
Your your film is one of the rare ones where you have like two. It's like, let's say you take two different audience members. One reads the log line and then watches
Mm-hmm.
the film. You
Mm-hmm.
have one that doesn't read it and watches the film. The one that reads it, there's this anticipation because you're waiting to see the loss, which brings a lot of apprehension. But then
Mm-hmm.
there are those who don't read the long line. They're going to sit down, they're going to watch the film from beginning to end, and then to try to comprehend once it's over. The feeling is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if someone doesn't read the log line and watches this film, I think it has a more of a stronger spiritual aspect to it than if you were to read the log line.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that was the other thing. I didn't want, especially I think as Native people, so many of our stories are tied to trauma and struggle. Um, and yes, we're dealing with death, an unexpected death, but I didn't want that to be the focus. I wanted the love to be the focus. And so it didn't really matter how she passed or what happened or what the scenario was. It was something that I really wanted us to stay rooted in the emotion of it all. But yeah, I didn't even really think about that. Yeah, if the log line was out, then you would have some sort of lead to potentially what you'd be seeing. But if you didn't, then yeah, you'd be on your own trip.
Well, yeah, but but at the same time, I love the fact that you didn't focus on the cause of the loss.
Yeah.
You're just
Hmm.
focusing on trying to understand and get through the
Hmm.
loss. And that's where
Yeah.
the thin places come into. I also noticed that the color palette of the film played a very important role. I
Hmm.
saw the color yellow is seen throughout. Why?
Hmm. Um, you know, I don't know. I think it's a color that I love, and you see certain films that have a very specific, color contrast to them. And again, just sort of using tools in my arsenal about really trying to develop an emotional like literacy to this film. Um, And so, yeah, I decided early on that I wanted it to have sort of that type of hue to it. But the girls' outfits were very, color coordinated by emotional beat and moment. This is my first narrative film. My background's in documentary, and so this is the first time I wrote and directed something narrative. And so I really wanted to have the opportunity to play with some of the things that I'd learned, and really sort of create a world. I think, in documentary, you don't quite have that luxury. And so stepping off into a narrative space, really wanting to use the tools at my disposal to create a world that I wanted to be in and I wanted to see. Um, so I think that was where that kind of came from. And then again, leaning really hard on that sort of golden hour warmth, like these moments when they are together. I want it to feel this elation and this connection. And when Birdie is by herself, it's these more, these darker, more muted colors, or more natural colors. The house is it's darker. um, so I just trying to use certain elements in my filmmaking tool bag that I thought could help get the um, emotional thing across. That's what I was hoping for.
Well, I was going to bring that up because I noticed that the lighting from the indoor shots, the lighting where Birdie, she's sitting down, she's smoking a cigarette, she's got that moment at the steps. Um, Not counting the the actual outdoor shot where the sun is shining, but everything else, there is that muted tone carried out to the very end. And to me, that's almost like the signature of the film. Now, Britt, when someone loses a sibling, some don't know how to process the loss and move on. And they say it takes time, but Birdie was actually going through this phase herself, wasn't she?
Yeah. Well, sorry. Do you mean in the story, or are you talking about Shelby? I just got a little
Oh
confused.
no, in Birdie, the character in the film.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. It wasn't only just she wasn't just going through the loss of a sister, it was also her nephew. So, and sort of the backstory in my mind was that they had lived together, the three of them. We see a little bit of their dynamic in the very beginning of the film, but we never see them on camera established until the meadow, which was very intentional as well.
Yeah, I noticed that with the dialogue, it didn't dawn on me until the dialogue in which I realized that he was lost as well.
Yeah.
But like you said earlier, that you didn't focus as to why the loss happened. We're just
Yeah.
dealing with the aftermath of the
Hmm.
grief from that
Yeah.
loss. So I
Yeah.
appreciated that much in the film because a lot of these films that have to deal with grief,
Mm.
they go in different directions and people interpret it in many different ways. Now, with this film, tell me about the music score.
Yeah. Yeah. The score is by Daniel Bachman, who is a really, really talented musician, and film composer. He is someone that I have worked with on almost all of my films. There's something so specific about the sort of the vibe and the tone of his music that really is something special. It really hits me hard. And Daniel does something pretty cool where he will capture the sounds of specific locations, and sort of blend those things together. And funny enough, I had been writing the script to some old music of his, and so I'd reached out and was like, "Hey, do you have anything new? Um, there's this album of yours that I'm listening to right now on Spotify while I'm writing, and it's kind of the vibe that I'm hoping for this film. Let's talk about it." And he said, well, what's the project? So we talked about the project, and he said, funny enough, that album that you're listening to is one I wrote about grief, about losing loved ones. And I was like, what? Okay, we need to use that. So it sort of became, the whole sound of the film. There's something about it too that's not just musical. It's very like soundscapey, which I wanted it to be, that sort of ambient, kind of obscure. Um, and then we did some, music licensing too, for the film, which for some specific songs that we were excited about, and that specifically that Tama dancing scene in the kitchen. Um, but yeah, Daniel Bachman's work is incredible, and he's also going to be scoring my feature film that I'm working on now too. So we're kind of keeping the collaboration going.
Oh, fantastic. Now, with Thin Places, what has been the reaction to the film so far?
It's been really, really lovely. I think as a director, never really know. It's always a toss up. Like, it's something that matters so much to you, and all the things about it and what you put into it, but you never really know how it's going to be received. And it's been really, really special. We've had our first three festivals under our belt, and yeah, it's been very personal conversation shared. I've been really blown away by the impact it's had. I kind of had a hunch that it would, really hit people in the hearts, but I didn't really understand the magnitude of it. And so many audience members have come and shared very personal stories about how it kind of put them right back where they had been in a specific season of their life, or a person that they had lost. And I actually just got an email from a woman the other day saying, after watching the film, I'm just reminding myself to hug my daughter tighter. These just real human things. I think you don't have to be, a woman or indigenous for this film to land. It's a universal film about very universal themes, and it's really lovely to have it be so well received. We won Best Oklahoma Short at Dead Center, which was incredible. And then Quannah got a outstanding performance in an acting role at an Imaginative Awards. And that was really, really wonderful. And I'm just excited for more folks to get to see it too.
I love that. Now, you said you're working on a feature film, so any hints as to what it would be?
Yeah, yeah. The film is called What She Carries, and it is a documentary feature focusing on the revitalization of traditional birthing practices in Indigenous communities. Yeah, so we're
Oh.
very, very excited. We're going to 7 different regions across the United States, or as most Native communities call it, Turtle Island. So we're really trying to highlight the differences, but also the similarities between a lot of our practices that revolve around women. I think especially in the climate that we're in, with questions of body sovereignty and justice. So we're really, really excited. We're hoping this film will be a resource, sort of reimagining what birth can be, and hopefully a very empowering film for not only Native women, but women at large. So we're very excited about it.
Well, when you get it done, you're going to have to come back. I would love to discuss that subject
Absolutely.
with you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Thin Places is about Birdie's sister Tama's untimely passing. But Birdie learns that the bond between them is stronger than life and death, and in between states of memory and heartbreak, Tama and Birdie show how we can continue on in a different way if we're willing to listen. Now, I've done many interviews on the subject of grief, but talking with experts, but also many filmmakers. Now, Brit's Thin Places is one of the few films that captures loss, grief, and love with a deep emotional and spiritual tone rarely captured on film. Now, the perfect casting of Shelby Factor and Quannah Chasinghorse makes you believe they are truly sisters. And the cinematography and the color palette play a vital role in this film, and I wish more and more filmmakers will take some tips from this film. Sometimes a story is better told when the elements like camera movement, color, and editing are elevated and treated like an invisible actor. Now, Thin Places is a beautiful film that will reach into the audience's heart, and for some, it will bring understanding and healing, knowing that the distance between life and death is closer than you think. And Brit, I want to thank you so much for sharing this incredible film with me, and good luck to you in this year's film festival run.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. It was great chatting with you.
You're very, very welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show and our YouTube channel, and you can listen to us on your way to work on Spotify, iTunes, and Audible, and more. So I want to thank you for watching. You're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.
Have you considered that maybe you're closer than you've ever been? Even though I always had you. Wake up. I'm alone.